In the small town of Willow Creek, where quiet streets are lined with old houses and time seems to have stood still, for childhood friends reunite after years apart. Life has taken them in different directions, but the bond they built during their youth remains intact. Now 30 years old, Ethan was the first to leave Willow Creek, pursuing a career in technology in a big city. Intelligent and practical, he was always the leader of the group, the one who found solutions to the most complicated problems. Despite his professional success, Ethan feels a certain nostalgia for the simpler days of his childhood, and he is the one who suggests the reunion. Sarah, 29, stayed in Willow Creek, working as a teacher at the local school. Creative and dreamy, she always had a fertile imagination and a curious spirit, which led her to explore every corner of the town as a child. Despite never leaving her hometown, Sarah feels a restlessness, a sense that there is something more out there that she has yet to discover. At 31, Jason is the oldest of the group and the most adventurous. He spent most of the last decade traveling the world, working on documentaries about cultures and local stories. With his sharp sense of humor and unwavering courage, Jason is the type of person who faces any challenge head-on. But despite all his adventures, he never forgot his roots in Willow Creek. Emily, also 30, is a dedicated doctor who returned to Willow Creek after years of studying and working in hospitals in big cities. Always the most rational of the group, Emily is skeptical of the supernatural but values the friendships she formed in childhood. For her, this reunion is an opportunity to reminisce about the old days and reconnect with the people she always considered her second family. After a night of conversation, laughter, and memories about the adventures they had together as children, Ethan suggests they do something they couldn't do in their childhood: explore the abandoned house on the outskirts of town, known as Holloway House. When they were young, the house always intrigued them. It was reputed to be haunted, and the residents of Willow Creek avoided even passing near it. However, as children, the group always dreamed of uncovering its secrets but never had the courage to enter. Now, as adults, Ethan sees the exploration as an opportunity to close an unfinished chapter of their lives. He argues that, despite all the rumors and stories circulating about the house, they are now rational and capable of separating what is real from what is merely a product of imagination. Besides, exploring the house would be a fun way to relive old adventures and finally discover if the legends about the place have any basis. Jason, always in search of new experiences, readily agrees, excited by the idea of one last great adventure in Willow Creek. Sarah, with her curious spirit, is also eager to see what lies behind the stories she has heard all her life. Emily, although reluctant and skeptical, decides to join in so as not to let her friends face it alone, and because, deep down, she also wants to see if there is something more behind the legends. Thus, with the decision made, the group of friends prepares to face the mysteries of Holloway House. Unbeknownst to them, they are about to enter a place where reality and illusion intertwine, and where the secrets of the past still lurk in the shadows. What begins as a simple exploration to relive childhood nostalgia quickly turns into something much darker and more unexpected. Holloway House is located on the outskirts of Willow Creek, far enough from town to seem almost forgotten by time. The dirt road leading to it is covered by ancient, twisted trees, whose branches form a natural tunnel, filtering the sunlight and creating a gloomy and unsettling environment. The air around the house feels heavier, laden with a stillness that is almost oppressive. The house itself is an imposing structure, built in the late 19th century. Its wooden walls are weathered by time, with the once white paint now peeling and stained with a yellowish-gray hue. The windows, large and numerous, are covered in dust, and some are broken, as if the glass itself is weary of holding the secrets the house keeps. A front porch extends along the facade, but the floorboards creak with every step, and the old swing hanging there sways slightly, even though there is no wind. Above all, the slanted roof, with missing shingles and moss growing on the edges, gives the house a look of impending collapse. However, despite its state of decay, there is something unyielding and imposing about the structure, as if the house refuses to give in to time, standing firm as a silent guardian of its own mysteries. The surroundings of the house are overgrown with wild vegetation, with thorny bushes and overgrown trees that have almost swallowed what must have once been a garden. Nature seems to be trying to reclaim the space, but the house resists, as if it is not ready to be forgotten. When the friends finally arrive at Holloway House, a sense of silent discomfort spreads among them. Even Jason, the bravest of the group, feels a chill down his spine at the sight of the house up close. They exchange looks, and for a moment, they all seem to hesitate, but pride and curiosity drive them to continue. Ethan, always the leader, is the first to ascend the steps to the porch. Each step causes the floorboards to creak, echoing in the stillness of the place. Sarah follows closely behind, her eyes scanning every detail of the house, her imagination beginning to craft stories about what could have happened there. Emily, though skeptical, feels a slight unease she cannot explain, while Jason, with a camera in hand, begins filming the journey, eager to capture every moment of the experience. As they approach the front door, a feeling of being watched begins to weigh on them. It is almost as if the house is alive, aware of their presence, waiting to see what they will do next. When Ethan places his hand on the rusty doorknob, he notices that the metal is surprisingly cold to the touch, as if it had been taken from ice. As he opens the door, a long, mournful creak resonates through the air, making them hold their breath for a moment. The darkness inside the house seems even denser than the night outside, as if it is swallowing the daylight trying to enter. The smell of mold and old wood fills their nostrils, an unpleasant mixture that causes Emily to instinctively cover her nose. However, despite the discomfort, curiosity and the desire to uncover the secrets of Holloway House propel them forward. With flashlights in hand, the friends take their first steps into what appears to be a living room, the beams of light cutting through the darkness and revealing furniture covered with white sheets and dust, like ghosts waiting to be awakened. Little do they know that by crossing the threshold, they have already begun to drift away from reality as they know it. Each step inside that house brings them closer to a world where normal laws do not apply, and where time and space bend to the will of something much older and more malevolent than they can imagine. The friends, still adjusting to the darkness and heavy air of the house, begin to explore the living room. The flashlight beams reveal furniture covered with white sheets, now gray from the thick layer of dust accumulated over the years. The outlines of the furniture suggest that, in times past, the room was a place of comfort, perhaps once filled with the warmth of family conversations and laughter. Ethan is the first to venture deeper into the room. He pulls the sheet off a large old sofa, revealing the worn and stained fabric from years of abandonment. Beside it, an equally old armchair is tilted to one side, as if someone had risen from it in a hurry and never returned. In the corner of the room, Sarah comes across an old fireplace. She runs her hand along the edge of the chimney, feeling the roughness of the cold stone and the buildup of dust. Above the fireplace, an old painting, almost faded by time, depicts a stern-looking family, all dressed in period clothing. The eyes of the figures seem to follow Sarah's movements, an illusion caused by the flickering light of the flashlight that makes her step back for a moment. Meanwhile, Jason, always in search of something more intriguing, finds a pile of old books stacked on a shelf on the opposite side of the room. The books are covered in mold, their hard covers faded, but he dares to open one. The pages, yellowed and fragile, contain writings that range from diaries to records of a long-forgotten era. Jason decides to keep one of the books to investigate later, curious to discover what else might be hidden in that house. Emily, who kept a certain distance from the center of the room, approaches a window. As she tries to clean it to peer outside, she notices that the window is strangely fogged from the inside, as if the house is exhaling an invisible moisture. The view of the outside is distorted, but she can make out the wild vegetation surrounding the house, creating a natural barrier that isolates it even more from the outside world. As they continue to explore, the friends begin to notice small details that suggest the house may not be as abandoned as it seems. The first incident occurs when Sarah, moving away from the fireplace, hears a faint whisper that seems to come from behind her. She quickly turns around, her flashlight sweeping the space, but she sees nothing but the shadows of the furniture. However, the sound persists, almost inaudible, as if someone is trying to communicate, but the words are lost in the air. Ethan, trying to open a door leading to another room, feels an unexpected resistance. He pushes a little harder, and the door finally opens with a loud crack, revealing a dark hallway. However, he swears that, for a brief moment before the door fully opened, he felt a cold draft pass by him, almost like a sigh. Jason, who was examining an armchair in a dark corner, suddenly feels the chair move slightly under his hand. He recoils, shocked, but tries to rationalize it, attributing the movement to his own imagination or the wear of the wood. However, a growing discomfort begins to settle within him. Emily, still skeptical, begins to feel a slight headache, something she has never experienced before. She tries to ignore it, attributing it to the heavy, moldy air of the house, but the pain intensifies when she enters one of the adjacent rooms. Inside, the smell of mold is almost unbearable, and the air feels denser, as if something invisible is pressing against her. She decides to quickly leave the room, trying not to alarm the others. The tension within the group begins to rise as these small incidents accumulate. Although no one wants to admit it, they all begin to feel that something is wrong in that house, something that cannot be easily explained. The atmosphere of discomfort is palpable, but none of them are willing to be the first to suggest that it might be time to leave. The group decides to continue exploring, trying to ignore the warning signs the house seems to be giving. However, each of them is already beginning to realize that Holloway House is much more than just an old building. The house is alive in some way, and it is aware of their presence. As the friends continue their exploration of Holloway House, the phenomena that once seemed like small isolated incidents begin to intensify, becoming impossible to ignore. As they move to the second floor, the atmosphere around them seems to change. The air, which was already dense and stuffy, becomes oppressive, almost suffocating. The flashlight beams begin to flicker irregularly, as if something is interfering with their energy. With each step, the wooden floor creaks ominously, as if the house itself is complaining about their presence. In the hallway on the second floor, the shadows seem to move on their own. Ethan, passing by an old mirror hanging on the wall, sees something that makes him stop suddenly. For a brief moment, he sees not just his reflection, but the indistinct figure of someone standing behind him, staring intently. When he turns to check, there is no one there. He tries to dismiss it as a trick of his mind, but the feeling of being watched intensifies. Sarah, exploring one of the adjacent rooms, finds an old music box on a dusty shelf. Curious, she turns the crank, and a slow, eerie melody begins to play, filling the silence of the house. But as the music plays, she notices that the melody is slightly distorted, as if something is wrong with the box. Before she can turn it off, the music stops abruptly, and Sarah feels a chill run down her spine. Jason, who is filming everything, begins to notice that his camera is picking up strange noises and static, even though the environment around them seems silent. He quickly reviews the footage and sees that in several parts, there are inexplicable distortions, flashes of light, shadows that do not correspond to any visible object, and in one scene, what appears to be a figure standing at the end of the hallway, motionless. Jason decides not to show the others to avoid causing panic, but the discomfort grows within him. Emily, already dealing with a growing headache, begins to feel lightheaded. As she leans against the wall for balance, she clearly hears the sound of children's laughter, coming from somewhere distant in the house. She tries to follow the sound, thinking it might be an auditory illusion, but the further she goes, the louder and more sinister the laughter becomes, until suddenly, it stops completely, leaving an unsettling silence. As they continue exploring, the friends begin to realize that the house does not follow the normal laws of time and space. Hallways that should lead to familiar places begin to transform, leading them to rooms they have already explored or to completely new and unknown spaces. Doors that were previously locked now open to reveal rooms that seem frozen in a specific moment from the past, with furniture and objects arranged as if they had been recently used, despite the dust that covers them. Ethan tries to remain calm and think logically, but even he begins to doubt his own perception when he notices that the wall clock he saw in the living room downstairs is now hanging in one of the second-floor rooms. Sarah, who already had a vivid imagination, begins to feel increasingly disconnected from reality, as if she is trapped in a nightmare from which she cannot wake up. The feeling of disorientation is accompanied by growing paranoia. the friends begin to question what is real and what is a product of their minds. More and more, they feel that the house is playing with them, manipulating their perceptions and emotions. Communication between them becomes more difficult as the tension rises, and each one begins to feel that they cannot trust even their own sanity. As they try to find a way out, the house continues to change around them, confusing their senses and testing their limits. What once seemed like a simple exploration has now turned into a struggle to maintain sanity and escape from something they cannot fully understand. Every corner, every room brings new surprises, and the feeling of being watched and manipulated becomes increasingly intense. They do not know how much time has passed since they entered the house. The concept of time seems to have distorted, and the only thing they know for sure is that they need to get out of there before it's too late. However, with the house constantly changing and the strange phenomena intensifying, finding an exit seems increasingly impossible. As the phenomena in Holloway House intensify, the group of friends begins to feel the psychological pressure of the environment. The fear and disorientation that the house provokes not only affect them individually but also begin to erode the trust they have in each other. Small disagreements begin to turn into major conflicts, exacerbated by the gloomy atmosphere and the strange events they witness. Ethan, who has always been the natural leader of the group, feels the weight of responsibility in keeping everyone safe. However, as the events become more disturbing, he begins to doubt his ability to control the situation. His attempt to remain calm is seen by the others as coldness, and they begin to question his decisions. Sarah, who always admired Ethan's confidence, starts to resent the fact that he seems so determined to continue exploring, even when everything inside her screams to leave. Jason, on the other hand, begins to emotionally distance himself from the others. He is obsessed with documenting everything that happens, almost as if he is more interested in capturing the experience than in finding a way out. His dedication to filming is interpreted by the others as indifference to the danger, creating tension between him and the rest of the group. Emily, who has always been the voice of reason, begins to question whether Jason is more concerned with his own project than with everyone's safety. Sarah, already scared and emotionally unstable due to the supernatural events, begins to isolate herself from the others. She feels that no one truly understands what she is going through, and her friends begin to seem distant and inaccessible. Her feelings of loneliness are exacerbated by the house itself, which seems to whisper lies in her ears, making her question whether her friends are against her. She begins to have difficulty trusting any of them, which only increases the tension within the group. Emily, dealing with her growing headache and the pressure of being the most rational person in the group, begins to lose her patience. She feels frustrated with the lack of answers and the increasing tension among the friends. Jason's seemingly indifferent behavior and Ethan's controlling attitude begin to deeply irritate her. She sees herself as the only person still thinking rationally, but her insistence on finding logical explanations for the supernatural phenomena begins to create friction, especially with Sarah, who is becoming more and more frightened. What was once a solid friendship begins to crumble under the weight of fear, paranoia, and isolation. The house, somehow, seems to amplify these feelings, pitting them against each other. Each one begins to question the intentions and sanity of the others, creating an atmosphere of distrust and tension that is almost unbearable. As the tension rises, the house seems to respond, separating the friends from each other in subtle but effective ways. The first sign of this occurs when Ethan, trying to explore a dark hallway, notices that the door he entered through has disappeared behind him. He tries to go back, but finds himself trapped in a labyrinth of hallways that seem never to end. With each step, he feels the presence of something in the shadows, but every time he turns around, there is nothing there. Meanwhile, Sarah, who had withdrawn to try to collect herself, finds herself trapped in one of the rooms. The door she swore she had left ajar is now locked, and the walls seem to close in around her. The room, once full of objects covered in dust, now seems immaculately arranged, as if someone had been living there. However, the atmosphere is dense and oppressive, and Sarah feels as if she is being watched from all corners. Desperate, she tries to scream for help, but her voice seems to be swallowed by the silence of the house. Jason, still obsessed with capturing everything, finds himself drawn to the house's basement, where darkness is almost total. His flashlight begins to fail, flickering erratically as he descends the creaking steps. The air in the basement is cold and smells of earth and mold, but he is determined to document what he finds. However, as he advances, he begins to feel that he is not alone. With each step, the echo of his own movements seems to be accompanied by another set of steps, lighter but unmistakably present. When he finally turns around, he sees only shadows, but fear begins to grip him, and for the first time, he questions whether he should be filming. Emily, finally, finds herself in a room that seems to be in a more advanced state of decay than the rest of the house. The walls are peeling, and the ceiling looks like it is about to collapse. She tries to find a way out, but every door she tries to open is locked or leads back to the same place. Her headache intensifies, and the vertigo returns in full force. Emily begins to feel as if the house is alive, pulsing around her, and increasingly senses that something very old and malevolent is present. With each friend isolated in a different part of the house, the sense of despair increases. They try to communicate, shouting each other's names, but their voices seem not to reach beyond the walls that separate them. The feeling that the house is deliberately separating and playing with them is inescapable. Now, each of them must face their own fears, without the support of the others, as the house becomes increasingly a living and hostile entity. While the friends are isolated in different parts of Holloway House, one of them, Jason, makes a crucial discovery in the basement, where he came across a collection of old, forgotten documents. Among the papers, he finds an old diary, its pages yellowed with age and covered with careful but almost illegible handwriting. As Jason flips through the pages, he realizes that this diary belonged to one of the house's first owners, a man named Thomas Holloway. As Jason reads the diary, he discovers that Holloway House has a much darker history than any of the friends could have imagined. Thomas Holloway was a man of science, fascinated by the mysteries of the human mind and the unknown forces of the world. The diary describes his experiments with dark practices and rituals, in search of what he believed to be the ultimate power, control over reality itself. However, as Jason reads on, it becomes clear that Thomas's experiments began to spiral out of control. The diary recounts how Thomas, obsessed with his studies, began to isolate himself from the rest of the world, pushing away friends and family. He began to hear voices and see shadowy figures around the house, but instead of stopping, this only fueled his morbid curiosity. Thomas believed he was communicating with an entity from another plane, something beyond human comprehension. However, this entity was not benevolent, it was an ancient and malevolent force that began to corrupt not only Thomas's mind but also the house itself. As the days passed, Thomas's diary became increasingly chaotic, with incoherent passages and scribbles of strange symbols. He described how the hallways of the house began to change, how he began to lose track of time, and how the entity fed on his emotions, especially fear. The final entry in the diary is disturbing, with Thomas admitting that the entity had taken full control and that he was merely a shadow of the man he used to be. The entry ends abruptly, with a dark stain covering the page, as if he had spilled ink or blood before finishing his words. Horrified by what he read, Jason realizes that the house is not just haunted, it is an extension of the very entity Thomas Holloway awakened. The house is alive, and its goal is to capture and consume those who dare enter. He tries to process this information and decide what to do next, but the weight of the discovery begins to crush his mind. He knows he needs to tell the others, but he is unsure how they will react to this terrifying revelation. While Jason makes this discovery in the basement, the other friends begin to have their own disturbing experiences that lead them to suspect the true nature of the house. Ethan, still lost in the hallways, begins to see visions of Thomas Holloway at different stages of his life, from a man with an erudite and confident appearance to a disfigured and insane figure, with empty eyes and whispering incomprehensible words. Sarah, trapped in the room, begins to have visions of a woman she assumes to be Thomas's wife. The woman, always on the verge of tears, seems to be trying to warn her of something, but her voice is distorted, and her words are impossible to understand. However, one thing is clear, the woman is desperate for Sarah to flee, indicating that she knows about the evil that inhabits the house. Emily, still trapped in her decaying room, begins to feel a presence around her, as if someone is always lurking just out of sight. Her headache intensifies to the point of nearly fainting, and she begins to hear what seems to be Thomas Holloway's whisper, trying to convince her to surrender to the house, as he did so many years ago. Finally, the friends, driven by the desperate need to reunite, begin to move toward the same central point, the large room at the center of the house, where the entity seems strongest. Along the way, each of them is confronted with visions and hallucinations that test their sanity and willpower. The entity is revealing itself to them, but not completely. It is toying with their minds, showing just enough to instill a deep and lingering fear. When they finally reunite in the central room, they share their experiences and realize that the house, or rather, the entity controlling it, is trying to trap them as it did Thomas Holloway. The revelation is overwhelming, but it also gives them a new determination. They need to find a way to destroy or weaken the entity to escape with their lives. Now aware of the true threat they face, the friends must decide how to fight something that defies all the laws of reality they know. Holloway House is not just a structure, it is a living trap, an entity that feeds on fear and hope and will not let them leave without a fight. With the revelation about the true nature of Holloway House still fresh in their minds, the friends unite in a desperate effort to escape. The sense of urgency is palpable, as each of them feels that time is running out and that the house, or rather, the entity controlling it, is growing stronger with every moment they spend inside. However, the house, now fully aware of their intentions, is not willing to let them go easily. Ethan, trying to keep the group together, suggests they retrace the path they took to enter, believing that if they can find the front door, they can escape. Leading the others with renewed confidence, he guides them back down the hallway they entered. But when they reach the door that should lead to the entrance hall, they discover that it now leads to a completely different room, a dining room they hadn't seen before. The dining room is a strange space, frozen in time. The table is set as if ready for a formal meal, with plates, silverware, and crystal glasses, all covered in a thin layer of dust. However, the friends notice that the food on the plates is rotting, as if it had been left there a long time ago, but also as if it had just been served. A nauseating odor permeates the air, and they quickly realize that this is not the way to freedom. Deciding that retracing their original path is not an option, Jason suggests they try to escape through the window of one of the upstairs bedrooms, an idea that seems logical given the house's confusing state. Climbing the stairs, they enter a room with a large window that appears to lead outside. However, as they approach, they realize that the landscape on the other side of the window is not what they expected. Instead of the tangled garden surrounding the house, they see a distorted and sinister version of Willow Creek, as if the town had been swallowed by the same entity that controls the house. When Jason tries to open the window, he discovers that the glass is incredibly thick and cold to the touch, as if it has fused with the house's structure. They attempt to break it using a chair, but the glass does not yield, emitting only a low, muffled sound that echoes through the room, as if the house is mocking them. The window, once a possible escape route, now seems more like an impenetrable barrier. With each failed escape attempt, the friends begin to realize that the house is toying with them, offering false hopes of escape only to snatch them away at the last moment. Frustration and despair begin to seep into their minds, and each of them starts to feel that the house is drawing them deeper into its web. Every door opened, every window tried, only leads them further into the labyrinthine structure of the house, which now seems to be expanding and changing shape at will. As the group continues their futile escape attempts, the tension between them reaches a breaking point. Ethan, feeling the weight of leadership and blaming himself for suggesting the exploration of the house in the first place, begins to question whether they will make it out alive. He realizes that to break the cycle they are trapped in, something drastic needs to be done. While discussing their options, Sarah, who has always been more sensitive to the house's energies, suggests that perhaps the entity is feeding off their unity and collective fear. She hypothesizes that if the group were to separate or if someone were to sacrifice themselves in some way, it might weaken the entity, giving the others a chance to escape. This idea, though disturbing, begins to make sense as they recall the stories about Thomas Holloway, who succumbed to the entity by isolating himself in his own fears. Jason, still carrying the weight of the discovery in the basement, volunteers to be the sacrifice. He believes that as the one who found the diary and uncovered the house's history, it is his duty to correct the mistake and free his friends. Despite the others' objections, he is determined to go through with his plan. Jason proposes that he stay behind, distracting the entity while the others make one last attempt to find the exit. He suggests they head back to the central room, where the entity seems to have the most control, and that he tries to confront it directly while Ethan, Sarah, and Emily attempt to open the front door. With heavy hearts and a sense of impending loss, the friends agree to the plan. They return to the entrance hall, and Jason heads to the central room, where the house's energy is most intense. When he enters the room, he immediately feels the entity's presence, as if the air around him is alive with an invisible and malevolent force. While Jason confronts the central room, the others run to the front door, which now seems strangely normal, as if the house is allowing one last chance. They try to open the door, and to their surprise, it opens easily. However, when they look back, they see Jason in the middle of the central room, surrounded by shadows that begin to envelop his body. Jason looks at his friends one last time, smiling with a mix of sadness and determination. He knows that this is the only way to save them, and with that in mind, he accepts his fate as the shadows completely consume him. The moment he disappears, the house seems to tremble, as if being shaken from within. With Jason now lost to them, the three remaining friends find themselves outside the house, the door closing behind them with a final sound. They run away from Holloway House, feeling the fresh, clean night air for the first time in hours. The sense of relief is overwhelming, but it is tempered by the pain of losing Jason, whose sacrifice gave them the chance to escape. When they look back, they expect to see the house as it was before, an old, abandoned structure. But instead, they see that the house appears to have shrunk and darkened, as if it is retracting upon itself, weakened by Jason's loss but still very much alive. The house remains standing, but the friends know it is not defeated, only temporarily sated. A few days pass after the destruction of Holloway House. Ethan, Sarah, and Emily return to their lives, but nothing is as it was before. The physical and emotional scars they carry are deep, and they all struggle to find a sense of normalcy after the terrifying experience. Ethan, who was always the confident leader of the group, now carries an invisible weight. The responsibility he felt for leading his friends into that house haunts him. He spends sleepless nights, reliving the moments of terror and Jason's sacrifice. Determined not to let Holloway House's story repeat itself, Ethan begins to research other urban legends and supposedly haunted places, hoping to prevent others from facing the same fate. Sarah, on the other hand, is the one who feels Jason's loss the most. They were always very close, and his sacrifice left a void she doesn't know how to fill. She returns to teaching at the local school, but her mind frequently wanders, recalling the visions she had and the souls she encountered in Holloway House. She feels a stronger connection to the supernatural than ever before, and decides to channel it into her art, painting images that reflect what she saw and felt, hoping to process the trauma and perhaps give voice to the souls they freed. Emily, the most rational of the group, tries to move on with her career in medicine, but the experience left its mark. She, who always believed that everything has a logical explanation, now finds herself questioning the limits of what is real and what is imaginary. The headache she felt in the house has disappeared, but she can't shake the feeling of being watched. Emily decides to start studying paranormal psychology, hoping to better understand what happened and to help others who may have gone through similar experiences. Although each of them is trying to move on, the friendship between them has changed. They continue to support each other, but the bond that once united them is now marked by something dark, something that only they fully understand. One day, Sarah receives an anonymous letter. The letter is handwritten, in a script she does not recognize. The content is brief but disturbing. Not everything that was in Holloway House is gone. Be careful. Frightened, she shares the letter with Ethan and Emily, but both are just as confused as she is. However, the letter brings to the surface a fear they were trying to bury, the possibility that the entity or something similar may have survived. Determined not to let this fear control them, they investigate but find nothing conclusive. The house is now just ruins, and the town of Willow Creek finally seems free of the shadow that haunted it. But the doubt persists, and each of them begins to notice small signs around them: a fleeting shadow, a whisper in the wind, a sense of being watched. Meanwhile, in a distant town, a new, old, and forgotten house attracts the attention of a group of young adventurers, curious to uncover its secrets. The final scene shows these new figures entering the house, where the air is heavy, and the shadows seem to move on their own. The camera focuses on a crack in the floor that slowly begins to widen, suggesting that the cycle may be starting again, in a new place, with new victims. Ethan, Sarah, and Emily may have escaped Holloway House, but the evil that inhabited it may have found a new home. The story may have ended for them, but for others, it is just beginning.